My father's strange farm. Could such terrible things exist in this world? I pulled into the dirt driveway that led to the house that had long since been abandoned. The two-story farmhouse sat on a small hill, dark and wistful. As I approached up the winding dirt driveway, I could see the dirty rotting wood and broken shutters hanging open from dark windows. That had been my home in the 1980s. I grew up there. I had left when I was 9. It was a small farm, only one cornfield, small enough that my father could work it alone with some leased machinery. Though the land was small, he made a good amount of money from it. The farm was different, strange. First one he would hammer in at the north end of the field, second one to the west end, third one to the east end, and fourth one to the south end. I had always wondered why he didn't hammer in the west end, Scarecrow last. It was closest to the house. But things had their order on that farm. You see, Dad said, it's special land, real special. Yields are off the charts for the size of the field. Stop chucking that football about and listen up, Timmy. I did what he said and followed behind him closely as he dragged the Scarecrow to the south end of the field. The butt of the Scarecrow's stake dragged through the dirt, kicking up dust. I listened carefully to Dad when he told you something. He only spoke kindly once. If he had to tell you twice, this is going to be your farm one day, Dad said. He drove the Scarecrow's stake into the ground. So soon. Not this harvest season, but maybe the next. I'm going to start teaching you of how things work round here. Little by little, he then hammered the top of the stake that ran up the back of the Scarecrow like a spine. I flinched at each of the 4 cracking shots. When he was done, he wiped the sweat off his brow and turned to me, his brooding figure silhouetted by the low afternoon sun. This land's good, Timmy, real good. He smiled with a twinge of a wild look in his eye. You just need the right fertilizer. With that, he started back towards the house. I stood there for a moment, staring up at the Scarecrow, its featureless straw face framed by a hood fashioned out of a ragged burlap sack. Stray strands of straw poking from its head fluttered in the gentle breeze. Something in my stomach churned over. I never did like those things. I popped the trunk of my rental car, pulled out a shovel, then closed the trunk again. I looked out over the field. It was barren now, the soil untouched for decades. The equipment shed was far to my right. On the east side of the field, it was as decrepit as the house. The roof had partially caved in, and the wall planks were warped in places. An iron chain fastened by 2 heavy-duty padlocks locked the doors. I swallowed hard. I prayed they were not in there. I started toward the farmhouse. The pylons were still out on afternoons in the growing season when the Scarecrows were in the field, and just as the sun turned orange and started its descent to the horizon, Dad would hammer and 10-4-foot wooden pylons round the house, and then take them down first thing in the morning. Each pylon had carvings on them, strange symbols that looked similar to what you would see on a totem pole. What are those? I had asked once. He'll tell you one day. You're not ready to know yet. When the pylons and Scarecrows were out, Dad had a strict rule. I had to come inside when the bottom of the sun touched the horizon. One afternoon I had spent too long playing outside. The sun was a big orange semicircle peeking over the horizon line, but I did not care that day. I was having too much fun and was feeling a tad rebellious. So I played. I was chucking Hail Mary passes to myself down the driveway in my head. I was the star QB of my favorite team, the New England Patriots. I always wanted to be like Dan Reno, and even though he was a Dolphin player and a division rival, he was still my favorite player, the high-flying, gun-slinging star QB that could chuck the ball 80 yards through the air. Yeah, that was me in my dreams, but reality was I never had the talent for the game, unfortunately. But that afternoon, for a short while, with the rambunctious imagination of a 9-year-old, I was king. I heaved the ball in the air and took off underneath it. Timmy Brentwood throws the pass high and long. The greatest quarterback to ever. Timmy, my father said sternly from the porch. Reality came crashing back. What's the rule inside before sundown? Gotta move on. Anger suddenly burned at the base of my chest. He was always ordering me around. I was always doing what he wanted. Always had to listen to him. He never listened to me. I was always meek and good and followed his orders. I never got what I wanted, so he could get screwed as far as I was concerned. Just this once. I wanted to play. No, I don't want to, I said, with all the misplaced confidence of a rebellious child. I want to keep playing. Dad stomped down the porch steps with purpose. He spoke through gritted teeth, his veins and tendons bulging from his neck. If I have to go out there and get you, boy, my heart froze. The confidence and anger melted away as quickly as it came. I was only scared now. I started back to the house, running past the pylons that Dad had erected earlier in the afternoon. At the base of the porch steps, he grabbed me by my wrist and hauled me up them without my feet touching the wood. He put me back down on the porch and grasped my shoulders tightly. He dropped his face to mine, his piercing gaze flaring with a ferocious intensity. You listen to me when I tell you to do something, boy. Then I got a hard clip over the ear. My ear wet, numb, and rung with a high-pitched whir. My eyes swelled with tears. I looked at him stunned. It was not the first time I had been hit, but it was the first time I had been hit over the head. Now go to bed right now without supper. Without saying anything, I ran inside, up the steps, slammed my door, and curled under the covers. I buried my face into the pillow, and only then did I sob. I walked past the pylons that had remained for all these years. Some still stood. Others had toppled over. They were old now, blackened with mold and weathered. The wood split, and the carvings faded. I walked up the porch steps that mourned their old age. For a moment I stood at the front door, tears stinging the back of my eyes. It was not the house I had come back for. It was what was in the field I needed to see, but it was the home I wanted to see, because through the bad memories there was still some good. The hinges whined as I pushed the door open. The house was as I remembered, untouched from that last dreadful night I spent here all those years ago, the night we had to flee. Only now the home was caked with dust and mold. Cobwebs had collected in the corners. The wallpaper had peeled in large sheets off the wall. All these artifacts of neglect and abandonment. No one could or ever will make them like Mom could. They were thick and fluffy, served with a generous drenching of maple syrup. Then she would get her plate and join us in the living room. I would cuddle up next to her on the sofa, and we would sit together to enjoy her pancakes and watch cartoons. It was the one time during the week that everything did not feel so cold, the one time Dad did not feel so distant, the one time I was not scared of him, the one time he would actually have a conversation with Mom and me, instead of talking in short and simple bursts or barking out orders. The one time we were a real family, I wiped my tears with my sleeve and walked outside. Leaving the home behind for the last time, I waded out into the field. The soil hard beneath my boots. I could feel the field's spirit. With some satisfaction, I felt it was weak. Dad had called it special. I would call it evil. The night Dad had sent me to bed with a clip over the ear and no supper. Mom had come up with some soup and a glass of soda. She handed it to me with a kiss on the forehead. A mother can't let her child go hungry, she said. It goes against all my nature. Thanks, Mommy. I know it's rough, Timmy, but try not to get too mad at him. He worries for you, that's all. I don't care. I hate him. She sighed and looked away, then ruffled my hair and gave me a smile. He does what he can to provide. Just leave the bowl and glass on the nightstand. I'll come in later and take it to the kitchen. She got up and walked to the door, pausing to say, I love you too, Mommy, I said, and she left the room. Later in the night, I had awoken suddenly. I sat bolt upright. And if they stole it, Dad would not buy me another. I could already hear his lecture in my head. Let it be a lesson learned. If you don't take care of your things, they won't take care of you, he would always say. I creeped to my door, eased it open, and peeked around the corner to my parents' room down the hall. The door was shut, and the house dark and quiet, perfect. I crept down the stairs and tiptoed to the kitchen, where Dad kept the front door keys in one of the drawers. I grabbed them, and then, dipping an hand out of the moonlight that flooded through the windows, I tiptoed to the front door. I eased back the dead bolts as slowly and quietly as I could. They drew back with a faint click. I waited nervously after each one clicked back, listening for my parents' door to fly open with my father's heavy footsteps tumbling out like a madman. But they never came. I opened the door and stepped out onto the porch. My bull sat 15 yards away, looking lonely in the driveway. A man's muffled scream came from the corn, and they were moving. The corn rustled violently, as did the scarecrows. They moved about wildly, as if they were wrestling with something. Another muffled scream. I watched on wide-eyed and frozen with terror as the scarecrows fought with something among the cornstalks. I thought that this was surely a bad dream, a terrible dream, a nightmare, and, in a sense, it was a nightmare, just not the kind you can wake up from. The muffled scream cut off abruptly. The scarecrows froze for a moment, their hoods ruffling gently in the breeze. They craned their heads, and their straw faces, featureless but somehow ingrained with hatred, settled on me. I was seeing something I should not be seeing. A shiver trickled down my spine. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called, caw-caw, 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 caw-caw. I was just about to scream when a hand grasped the back of my pajama collar and pulled me backwards into the house. I was flung to the ground by Dad. He stepped around me and slammed the door shut, then locked the 2 deadbolts. They drew shut with an emphatic shunk. I waited for Dad to turn around with a look of rage, but what I saw scared me worse. He had looked at me, not with rage, but terror. It was the first time I had seen him scared, and I would see him this scared only once more, just a few weeks later. I started to cry. Seeing him scared had scared me more than his rage ever could have. It's okay, he said shakily. You're okay, Timmy. He bent down and scooped me up. He carried me to my room as I cried, and he tucked me into bed, saying one thing repeatedly, you're okay, Timmy, you're okay. A murder of crows flew overhead. Moving strangely silent, I stood in the middle of the field. The once rich soil now sick. Up close I could see it had taken on a grayish hue, and there was something else, too. It was rumbling slightly, as if it were hungry. I readied my shovel and paused. I asked myself, do I really want to do this? What purpose did it serve? What would it change? Nothing. So why had I come back? Closure. That was why I could not move on if I did not have closure, nor could I heal. The nightmares would continue, the anxiety would persist, and my soul would continue to whittle and seep from wounds that wandering fingers of doubt kept prodding open. I had to see if it was all real. I could not let questions linger. Could such horror exist in this world, or were my memories simply warped and exaggerated with time? So, did I want to do this? Yes, the answer was always yes. I should have come back years ago. Maybe then I would not have suffered so long. Closure. That is what I needed. I pierced the soil with my shovel. My door had burst open in the middle of the night. Dad was in the doorway, a rifle slung over his shoulder. We need to go, he said. I sat up groggily. What? We need to go. He pulled me out from under the blanket. What's going on, Dad? We need to go. Why? He pulled me along at his side as we rushed down the stairs. His deep wrinkles and tanned skin, his strong jaw and sunken eyes, his pointed nose and thin lips, all twisted in an expression of terror. Terror like what had plastered his face the night he had caught me outside after dark, only worse. I started to cry, Dad, where is Mum? I thought I did everything right, he said absently. I don't know what I did wrong. The pylon's Mabe. The front door was already hanging open, and he dragged me through it. Outside, the corn was restless again. I don't know what I did wrong, Dad said. I don't know how I didn't hear them come in. Dad dragged me to the pickup truck in the driveway. A woman's muffled screams came from the corn. I looked over my shoulder toward the field to see the hooded heads bobbing around wildly again. Dad, where's Mom? I said with increasing urgency. I thought I did everything right. I don't know why it went wrong. He opened the pickup's passenger door and threw me inside. Dad, where is Mom? I screamed. He shut the door in my face. He walked around the front of the pickup, and for a moment he paused to look back at Phil and the scarecrows. The shotgun trembled in his hands. For what it is worth, I think he would have tried to save her if it was not for me. He continued around the car and climbed into the front seat. He fumbled with the keys in his trembling hands before inserting and turning them. The engine rumbled to life. Dad, tell me, where's Mum? He reversed suddenly, swinging the car around so the front end pointed down the driveway, away from the house. He slammed the stick into first gear and took off with a lurch. The dirt clattered the underneath of the truck as we went. Where's Mom? I cried shrilly. I tossed aside the first clump of soil. Underneath the topsoil, the dirt was gray and pale as bone. I continued to dig, tossing the soil in a heap to the side, where it trembled subtly. Then I hit something with a hollow thud. I threw away the shovel and got to my knees. I reached into the hole and brushed aside the dirt. I uncovered what I expected, yet feared at the same time, a human skull. I plucked it from the dirt and held it up with shaking hands. The hollow eye sockets stared vacantly back at me. I put it aside and reached into the hole again. I clawed at the dirt frantically with my bare hands. There were more bones, skulls, hands, femurs. I pawed and pawed at the dirt. I dug until my fingernails were torn clean off. It was true. It was all true. There is evil in this world. My memories had not lied. I fell back on my ass, exhausted, terrified, despaired. A pile had formed round me. So many skulls, so many bones, all from the souls that had fed the soil. Story 2. I've just seen my family's abandoned old farm being explored by someone on TikTok. He shouldn't have gone there. It's late. I'm doing my usual, sitting in bed long past the time I need to be asleep, scrolling mindlessly through TikTok. It's a bad habit, I know, but you're here reading Reddit, right? I lazily flick the last watched video away. A cat wearing a helmet fashioned out of a melon, and a live feed takes its place. It's dark with torches or headlamps making almost a strobing effect in some crusty old building. Ghost hunters or something like that. Not my thing. I raise my finger to scroll again, but at the last second, something catches my eye that stops me. Dead. The camera pans past a black and white frame photograph on the wall. It's my grandparents on their wedding day. I sit stock still, watching intently as the camera moves forward. I would recognize that photo anywhere, having examined it countless times as a child visiting their farmhouse. It was my favorite picture out of any hanging on their walls. This TikToker couldn't be in my grandparents' old farm. Surely, it was true it had been left to fall into a state of disrepair after their passing. I look at their handle, a band 0 netexpl 0 or 305. I make a mental note to click on their page and see where else they have been, but for now cannot bring myself to look away from this feed in case it disappears forever. They move further into the living room. A leather armchair, well worn in its day, but now the cushions were sunken in and the fabric torn beyond repair. The fireplace, exposed stone and an enormous oak mantel, once the impressive focal point of the room, now warped and cracked. The lucky horseshoes that had hung from it litter the hearth, dull and lifeless. They had always been pride of place over the fire, polished and would glint in the firelight of an evening. The person holding the camera is speaking. I'd hardly noticed, as I was so wrapped up in a cloud of nostalgia and outrage at this space being invaded. There's so many horseshoes around here, he was saying. They're over door thresholds. There was one laid into the kitchen floor, and these ones look like they used to hang over the fireplace. Now I know this is a farm, and they probably did have horses, but they're just everywhere. Now everyone knows horseshoes are known as a good luck charm, but unless you're into your folklore, you might not know that they also ward off evil spirits. I roll my eyes. Common knowledge. Another TikToker claiming to be an expert on the paranormal. His observation does set off a small prickle on the back of my neck, though. There were a lot of horseshoes at the farm. I tuck that bit of knowledge away for future reference. Many years ago they had horses, but since the advent of modern tractors and farming methods, they were not needed, and neither Granny nor Grandpa had any great love for horses that I was aware of. Granny had always been a tad superstitious, though. Horseshoes, lucky heather for leaf clovers, that sort of thing. For the most part, I loved going to stay at Granny and Grandpa's when I was small, apart from going to the bathroom alone. The only bathroom was upstairs at the furthest end of the house from the kitchen or living room. To a kid it felt like an epic journey. Going up wasn't so bad. Once the door from the living room shut, you would find yourself in the cool, quiet passageway, all sounds of life muffled by the thick wood. The air was so still you could hear a pin drop. You'd walk along, then turn back 180 degrees to go up the stairs. The upstairs landing was split onto levels, so you'd step down onto the back landing, then take a right to get to the bathroom. It was going back down that was the problem, since I was old enough to go to the bathroom unaccompanied. Once I turned that corner and got to the top of the stairs, a feeling would hit, like an icy finger in the small of your back. Run. I would run down the stairs and back to the kitchen as quickly as my little legs could carry me. More than that, it was imperative that at no point did I turn and look back up at that landing. Bad things would happen if I looked back. As a child, I couldn't really express these feelings, but now, as I remember it, it felt like a creeping black mass seeping out of the walls of that back landing, coalescing, and all it would take to give it a corporeal form would be a terrified look back from a fleeing child. Then I would heave open the wooden door, and it felt like all the colors suddenly seeped back into the world. The warmth and noise of a busy family home flooding my senses, like pressing play, and the film restarts where it left off. In the live camera feed, they approach that solid oak door. It's hanging on one hinge, slightly ajar and swaying almost imperceptibly. I notice before the cameraman says aloud that there is a large cast iron horseshoe, big enough for a Shire horse or a Clydesdale, nailed above the threshold that I don't remember, but it suddenly feels important, like a talisman thrown up in a last-ditch effort to stop something. I grip my phone harder with a clammy hand, positive that they should not go deeper into the bowels of this house. I look at the comments flashing up. It's so creepy, seriously bad vibes. Did anyone else just see a shadow? With a shaky hand I start typing a comment, telling them not to go in there, to just leave, as if they will listen to me, just another voice in the throng. In my peripheral vision, as I'm typing, I can see the guy push open the door, which gives way with a creak, and just as I'm about to press send, I hear his sharp intake of breath. What the? I hear him whisper. I drop my phone onto the bed in shock. Standing side by side in the passageway are two gaunt figures dressed in nightgowns. They wear preternaturally wide grins, which stretch their papery gray skin taut. Where their eyes belong are only dark pits, what could be boreholes straight into the inky depths of hell itself. Somehow worse than that, Granny and Grandpa were holding hands. It was unmistakably then, despite their demonic manifestation. Though it's only a second, it feels like I stare into those twisted faces for half an eternity. All hell breaks loose on camera. A band 0 netexpl 0 or 305 turns on his heel and runs back the way he came. The camera work falls into disarray as he bolts for the exit. But I swear in that fraction of the second as his phone whips around, the creepily wide grins on their faces twists into a grisly snarl. I am transfixed by my phone screen, listening to the tick-tock guy's heavy breathing and watching the torch flit around on screen, lighting up walls and floors at random as he makes a break for it. His close to the back door as long as he doesn't turn the wrong way. 5 or 6 more paces and he'll be out. Then shockingly loud on the little phone speakers is an ungodly screech which makes me jump about a foot off my bed. Live has ended. The feed has just gone. I tap the screen futilely. Nothing. Did he make it out? I search for his handle on the app, and nothing comes up. I sit for a long time just staring into space, heart thumping. I should have commented sooner, As soon as I realized they were in that house, maybe that would have stopped them going any further. A notification pops up on my phone. A direct message on TikTok. Strangely, there's no account name with the message. Come to us. Very direct. No ambiguity there. I sigh and reach for a notebook from my bedside table to cross the latest attempt off the list. Communication with the undead via the internet is a new development. An extra deep grave debt do the trick. Rocks in their mouths, black salt, holy water from lords, a stake through the heart. Nothing keeps these restless souls in their grave for long. We don't know if it's the land itself, a curse upon the family, or something else. Did they see that black thing I was so afraid of as a kid? Was that the reason or a symptom? I glanced down the list of things yet to try. Next up, decapitation of the corpses. I don't relish the thought of that one. I fire off a quick text to my brother. Trouble at mill. That's the code. Code for get your shovel. We're off to dig up our old granny and grandpa again to see if we can finally get them to rest in peace like you're supposed to. The problem is each time we try to end this and fail. Every time they come back they are more changed than before. The last time they climbed out of that grave they looked like themselves, only dead. Upsetting but to be expected. The nightmarish figures I have seen tonight were a world away from that. I worry we are giving them power, feeding them somehow, but we can't just let them roam free, especially when other people get caught in the crossfire. I think this is going to require some outside help. Story 3. Some weird things has happened at the farm I work at. It might be wise of me to give some background info on who I am. I am the son of a farmer. My dad is my biggest hero and has always been. My interest in farming has always been apparent, and as long as I can remember, I have roamed the barns and helped out at home. 3 years ago I took an apprenticeship on the farm where I have worked since. My boss is Jens Hansen, and he is a great leader and inspiration for me. He and my dad have known each other since forever, which was part of the reason why I got this great opportunity. He welcomed me in great manner. I got my own lodge that Jens built for the workers. It was a cozy little home that I could call my own, and I liked it. The way things worked on this farm were a bit different than it did at home. And I am a bit of a slow learner, which meant the first couple of months were tough. I wanted to give a good impression, and when I did something wrong I became frustrated. Being able to solve problems on your own and not slowing others down is something I've always strived to do. And although Jens was patient, I felt like more of a hindrance than a help at the time. Around 6 months into my apprenticeship, I got asserted a new daily chore. I was to take the tractor down the field where we kept the pigs and give them water each day. I might have to explain which kind of farm this was. The farm has pigs and potatoes. Potatoes are a great business, but can only really thrive during the summer months. During the winter months, we mostly focused on the pig part. It was late November, which is why my help was needed elsewhere. One of the men who had been there in a couple of years, Peter, was helping me get a hang of the whole process of watering the pigs. Fill up their bucket and pour some in the mud if it has dried up. Easy enough. Each pig had their own piece of land where they lived. The different lands were parted by fences. The pigs lived in houses I best can describe as larger dog houses, huge boxes with a number. When we arrived at one of the last houses, Peter stopped the tractor. I looked in the direction he was fixated on, and saw one of the houses. It had the usual number on the front, but something else was scribbled on the side of it, and what looked like chalk were written "Den her." "This one?" I asked Peter what that was about. He hesitated for a few seconds and then began to explain. Apparently, it was a common phenomenon on the farm, and it had happened for as long as Peter could remember. Once every other week or so a house would be marked, and the pig within this house was to be released into the woods. I was dumbfounded. "What does it mean?" I asked him. "To know, but Jens is very serious about it." "Is he the one who wrote it?" I asked. Peter didn't answer. He jumped out the tractor and went to house. The pig was outside waiting at its water bucket. He lifted the fence enough for the pig to slip through. He guided it in the direction of the field entrance, and then into the woods next to the field. The pig ran eagerly into the woods and disappeared. He walked past me back to tractor, and when he passed me he looked at me with a concerning expression. "I wouldn't worry too much if I were you. This is just one of those things that has to be done. Don't think about it and don't ask about it. What happens if you don't release the pig? To know, don't wanna." He shrugged. The next couple of months went by with little to no trouble. I drove the tractor down to the field and watered the pigs. When I saw a marked house, I would release the pig, wash off the mark, and give it a new number. No questions asked, as it often happens with routine. I started to see it as part of the job, and soon enough seeing a marked house put more bummer feeling into me than a what, why, when. I wish I had taken this more serious. Over the months, I had tried to come up with a logical explanation as to why we would release a random pig every few weeks. Were there any particular advantages to this? Was it a deal between the local hunters and the farmers for a more interesting hunting experience? Was it some tax evasion tactic? It must have been something rather serious, because none of the other workers seemed to want to talk about it. I settled on it being an overpopulation issue, and releasing a pig was the easiest way to relieve some of the pressure from the business. On this particular day it was extra cold outside. The water buckets down at the field had frozen over and needed refill. I had already been there in the morning, but had to go down there again in the afternoon to make sure it wasn't frozen over again. When I came to the very last house, I literally stared with my mouth wide open. It was marked. I had just been there in the morning, and there had been nothing out of the ordinary. I was the only one who had been down at the field that day. It couldn't have been Jens or any of the workers. I walked up to the house and looked inside. It was number 48, the one who got pregnant due to a stupid male having been in the mood and therefore ran down the fence. She had just born 12 healthy piglets a couple of nights ago. I couldn't get myself to do it. It is some kind of prank, I told myself. Some kid's playing tricks on us to make us release more pigs than we have to, and let 12 little piglets freeze to death. They must have snuck in during the day. There is no other way. I filled up the bucket and put some extra water in the mud hole for later. I washed off the mark and left the number unchanged. Then I headed home, sitting in my seat feeling good about the happy pig family I just saved from disaster. Something suddenly caught my attention. I looked in the back mirror and saw something standing on the edge of the forest, looking right at me. It stood out clearly from the white of the snow surrounding the bushes, tall and hairy, like a bear, but slimmer and standing on two legs. It must have been leaning on a tree or something. I barely noticed it before it turned around and walked into the forest. I was confused, as bears had never been common in our area, and especially not in the winter period. That night I had horrible dreams. I would hear growling and a distinct scraping sound coming from right outside the lodge. I would slowly wake up, but as soon as I opened my eyes and came back to conscience, it would cease. The next morning I had some breakfast with the other workers. Jens had joined us as he often would, choosing his dedicated workers over the wife every now and then. We talked about everything from women to sports and had some great laughs. Hey, Jens, I didn't know there were bears in these woods. I was still chuckling lightly from the previous joke Teeter had uttered about some politician that he despised. Jens turned white as a sheet. What did you just say? Everyone went silent. I just noticed a bear standing near the woods yesterday. It seemed like it was starving, though. Everyone was looking at me now. Looks of horror and concern pierced through me, and I swear I have never been more confused in my life. Jens suddenly stood up and bolted outside. I looked to the other workers, but they all just sat there, looking at me. I stood up and ran outside. Jens was standing in front of my lodge, just staring. I walked up to him, and right before I could say a word I saw something. It was some kind of writing on the front door. It looked like it was written in chalk. Then it said this one note: "Hey guys, this started a weird chain of events that I don't really have the time or capability to put into words right now. I might try to upload the rest of the story if the interest is there. Have a great day. Story 4. It followed me home from the haunted farm. Today, my friends and I started celebrating the Halloween season by going to a haunted farm off in the outskirts of town. I use the term haunted loosely because this place is really just a scaled-down theme park that's been in the region for over 20 years. I don't scare easily, so I wasn't expecting much from the visit aside from a bit of light-hearted fun with friends. Who would have thought after an evening of cheap jump scares and screaming mostly to be polite, I'd find myself sitting in my bed, genuinely shaking in fear? I certainly didn't. Yet here I am, all because something followed me home. Whenever a car drives down the street, I can catch glimpses of it, slowly crawling down my neighbor's house and towards mine, as though toying with me. It all happened because of that damn farm. We arrived at the farm late in the afternoon. It was nice out. Not too hot, not too cold. The farm was neat, though it wasn't overly spooky-looking in the light of day. They'd built a few old Wild West-style houses they'd decorated with pumpkins and giant spiders, had a few creepy mascots walking around, and sprinkled demonic baby dolls where they saw fit. In the daytime, this place was a playground for kids. I saw more bouncy houses and face-painting stations than scary attractions, but I expected things would change once the sun went down. My friends and I headed out to do the corn mazes while they were still open, and then headed to the food trucks for supper. By the time we were done eating, it was finally dark out, and the toddlers had sprouted into teenagers. As expected, the park looked a lot creepier at night. They'd turned on their fog machines and colored lights to give the place a surreal atmosphere. The mascots had changed their makeup from sort of menacing, but still friendly, to sort of demonic, with a few vampires and masked witches thrown in for good measure. It was fine. Not all that scary, though, and not trying to make myself out to be some unshakable badass or anything, but I honestly don't scare all that easily, am not really susceptible to things I know aren't real. Creepy music and plastic hatchets just don't work on me. You could blame my time hanging around asleep for the desensitization, but the truth is, I've always been pretty numb to horror. Am more afraid of practical things, like being stuck in line for a haunted hayride for half an hour with a bunch of rowdy 13-year-old kids screaming profanities to try and outshock one another, splinters, and disgusting porta potties, the first and last of which I experienced at the farm. Ugh. My friends and I walked around and tried out the different attractions. We did the aforementioned hayride, the Witch's Coven, and the Demonic Funhouse, which was fun for all the wrong reasons. See, the funhouse was pretty tame, all things considered. You walk your way through the world's most straightforward maze, and from time to time a creepy clown appears out of nowhere and kind of shuffles behind you and follows for a bit. I can see how that might be a bit unsettling to kids, but these clowns were all actors, and they weren't allowed to actually touch anyone, so there really wasn't anything to be scared of. That didn't stop this one chick from breaking down outside the attraction. This 20-something gal totally lost it. She was sobbing in her boyfriend's arms, and I couldn't help but laugh as we walked past her. Sorry, but if you can't handle a clown standing next to you for half a second, maybe you shouldn't be going into a demonic funhouse. Just saying. Check yourself before you emotionally wreck yourself. It was getting late, and we still had one major attraction to go to. According to our map, it was the scariest of them all, for chainsaws out of 4. Having heard screams of abject terror coming from that side of the park, I was really looking forward to seeing what all the fuss was about. Along the way, my friend pointed out a cemetery with a half-open gate, 10, not a soul in line to go in. There had been a 30-minute wait for all the other attractions, but this one was as still as the grave pun intended. Should we go in? She asked. Might as well, I replied. The door squealed as we opened it the rest of the way. Oh boy, someone had left the fog machine all overnight. The curtains of smoke were so thick I couldn't even see my own feet. I grabbed the friend behind and in front of me just so we wouldn't lose one another in the mist. That's how dense it was. I didn't really like the cemetery, for one thing. There wasn't much to it. A few tombstones here and there, a crypt, some gargoyles, but overall, it was just annoying. I kept tripping on exposed tree roots and fake plastic bones. It was a pain in the ass, but it was worth it for the one genuine scare I got all night. As I was turning a corner, I felt something grab my leg. I let out my only authentic scream all evening, because I had no idea we weren't alone in the cemetery. The fog had done a great job hiding this guy in a pitch-black morph suit, crawling around on all fours. I only saw him because, as I screamed, I also flapped my arms around like a drunk duck trying to take off, and the motion dispersed the fog for a second. The guy crawled away and disappeared behind a tombstone. My friends laughed and laughed and laughed. Whatever, I mumbled, wasn't even scared. We found our way out of the cemetery after that and headed to the main attraction. The wait was longer than any other attraction at the farm because it was allegedly the scariest of them all. The cream of the crop, hell, after the scare I'd gotten at the cemetery. My expectations were pretty high for this one. And it was fine. I mean, there were guys in pretty realistic pig masks running after us with chainsaws, but even in the dark, I could tell the blades weren't actually moving. I didn't feel like I was in danger. Well, aside from the very real danger of possibly losing all blood circulation in my arm, when one pigman jumped in front of us, and my friend grabbed me so tightly my fingers went numb. She screamed. I just kind of stared at the pigman unfazed. I half expected him to tell me to feed the pig. Not tonight, buddy, not tonight. We drove home after that and chatted about our favorite parts of the night. You got Sue scared in the cemetery, taunted Jules. I huffed. That dude startled the shit out of me. The car went silent. What guy? Someone in the back seat asked. Dude in the morph suit, I answered. Hot. He was crawling on the floor. Didn't see him. I shrugged. It was foggy. We went back to chatting. Eventually, I dropped off everyone at their places. I was tired by the time I got home, so I booted up my computer and uploaded the photos we'd taken that night. Everything was pretty normal until we got to the cemetery. Or rather, after the cemetery. Morph suit guy was in the background of all the other photos I took, which was really strange to me, since I thought the mascots were supposed to stay in their attractions. They had these lame bios for their mascots on the website, so I looked him up just to see he wasn't listed. I felt a small knot in my stomach, but laughed it off. There were plenty of guests in costumes. Maybe this was an annoying teenager having fun. At this point, I thought I could hear a squirrel or something scratching at my bedroom window, but couldn't spare a glance. I was too busy staring dumbfounded at the website. ID clicked on the venue map link. ID noticed the distinct lack of a cemetery. The thought did occur to me that this was all intentional on the part of the people running the farm, a great way to get one last scare out of their guest after they'd gone home. It was as easy as not drawing a cemetery on their little cartoon map, as simple as not including it on the list of attractions, as easy as omitting one spooky mascot from their character bios. I wish that were the case. I wish that, when I looked out the window, I hadn't seen the figure in the morph suit staring back at me, and then quickly skittering backwards across the yard and up to my neighbor's roof. I wish he'd stop crawling nearer whenever I blink or look away. Every time I focus on my screen to write another line, I catch him in my peripheral vision. He's at the window right now. I give him a quick glance. He runs away. I can't help but worry what'll happen when I close my eyes and fall asleep. I think he'll find out soon. I'm so tired I can't keep my eyes open. Story 5. I bought a farm in the countryside, and it ended up being a nightmare. I was from the city. I had dreams of escaping the busy day-to-day shuffles of it all, and always dreamed of living in a small town away from everything. After months of hunting and arguing with realtors, I found some property I wanted to call my own and start a new life with my son. It was a small farming town in Kansas, with a population of around 2,000 people. It was perfect. I bought the land, packed me and my son Elijah's things in a U-Haul, and we made our journey to our new home. Looking back on it, he was more excited about it than I was, and I was pretty damn excited myself. Me and my son's escape from everything and to start a fresh new chapter in our new lives. My son was just coming up on 9 years old. His new school was close to our new farm, and he didn't have many friends in the city, so I knew the move was going to be good for him. His mother, my wife, passed away when he was at an early age due to an illness, so I was filling in as both parents. He was a pretty happy kid, though, always energetic and curious, just like his mother. The farm I bought was called Crow's Rest. It was a couple acres filled with sweet corn that was already taller than me. A lot of it was ready to harvest, too, and I was excited to get started in our new venture. When I saw the layout online, I could only think, it's perfect. It wasn't too big, not too small either. The two-story house on the property looked like it wasn't in bad shape either, like someone recently fixed it up. The bank said the last owners just abandoned it out of nowhere, and I was able to get it for a steal. They said it's common for people to get overwhelmed by the high maintenance it takes to run a farm. I knew I was ready, though, after hours of driving across the states, we finally arrived at our new home. It was about noon when we arrived at Crow's Rest for the first time. The way the fields and the house brightened in the countryside sunlight, it was beautiful. Elijah could barely contain himself in the passenger's seat when we pulled up, quickly pulling on the door handle, yelling and screaming in excitement. I was happy he liked it. Again, seeing him happy was worth it all to me. I parked the car, and he was already in the fields, running down the walking path, wowing at it all. I also started making my way into the path, so I could finally scope it all out in person. One thing the photos didn't show was the number of crows on the property was overwhelming. They did forewarn me it wasn't just a name. Crows seemed to gather here a lot, but there were double the amount than what they showed in the property photos. I didn't let it get to me, though. It was the least of our issues. I knew there would be a couple things they'd sneak past us. "Dad, look over here," I heard Elijah yell in excitement. I made my way over to him to see what he was so excited about and what he was staring at. It was a scarecrow. I walked up next to Elijah. He was so excited to see it. It was positioned on this tall wooden cross that hung over all the cornfields. Its arms were wrapped around the sides like it was nailed on to look, like we were standing there, with its hands grasping the sides on the cross. I remember I thought then it looked eerie, to say the least, on our bright, happy new farm. This scarecrow was like a dark figure in it all, and it wasn't doing the best at its job, as crows rested on the cross with its hand on top of its shoulders. As I looked closely at its face, all I saw were stitches of eyes and a mouth with a sticking out, with a noose necked around its neck to hold its potato sack head. I looked round its body. It wore handmade clothes with little gaps of hay sticking out through the holes. The clothes were like farmers' clothes, but they were all darker shades from being dirty and worn. It wore a dark black trench coat that was worn out and ripped up near the bottom. It wore black boots, much like farm workers wear, with a toe box that looked like it had seen better days. And, lastly, a dark sun hat on his head as the finishing touch. It felt like it didn't fit in with the rest of the farm, but Elijah seemed to love him. "Can I name him Dad, please, please?" he said with excitement. I didn't want to ruin his happiness with how off-putting the thing made me feel. What the heck, I thought. If he enjoyed it, I figured I'd suffer with the eyesore for him. "Yeah, go ahead. Name it whatever you want." Elijah thought on it for a bit. He looked around the farm and at all the crows, and then back at the scarecrow. "Tobias, traitor to all Kraken," he said with such innocence in his voice. Honestly, giving it a name like that made it seem more or less eerie, weirdly enough. Tobias, it is then, with an arm around him, I said, "Come on, let's get things unpacked and check out the new place," I said, directing him back toward the direction of the car, crows going all around us as we made our way back. The first couple of weeks were great. I started getting a handle on the whole farm life, got all the equipment and tools we needed, some minor fix-ups around the house and the barn, and even told Elijah soon we could start picking out some animals. Even made our way into town, getting to know a lot of the locals. Many of them had never even heard of Crow's Rest when I brought it up, which was strange to me with how close to town it was. They were excited about the corn I was promising everyone, though everything was perfect until it all started happening all at once. I was working on the barn out back, on the opposite side of the crops, away from the house. I was giving it a fresh coat of paint that it desperately needed. When I heard Elijah in the fields, it was like he was talking to someone, curious about it all. I yelled out to him, "Who are you talking to?" "Buddy." It was quiet for a bit. I got worried, so I dropped my brushes and walked over to where the walkway that went through the field. "Elijah," I said again. Then he popped out from the crops, looking at me like he did something wrong and was scared to be in trouble. I tried to see what was the matter. "What's up, buddy? Who were you talking to out here, the birds?" I said jokingly, but he had a nervous face on him. "I was talking to Tobias," he said, still nervously. I didn't think much of it, so I added to it, "Oh yeah. What did Tobias have to say? Is he ready for some new clothes because his aren't looking so pleasant nowadays?" I continued joking as I was whipping some paint that got on my hands on my pants and started walking back toward the barn side. "Tobias doesn't talk much. He just listens," he waved at me. So I waved back at him and asked how he was. Elijah said it waved at him. It must have been the crow's movement, and he got it confused. Still, I didn't want him to think it could move. "I don't think Tobias can't move, buddy. He is made of straw, after all." Elijah interrupted me before I could finish. "He does move, Dad. I've seen it," he yelled out at me. I had no idea what he was talking about or how to even respond back to it. "Are you sure, buddy? When did you see such a thing? Or have I been missing something?" I said, clearly arguing with my 9-year-old about if the scarecrow moved or not. "Well," he waved at me, "and he leaves his cross at night. I see him moving around the fields sometimes, and last night he was standing in front of our house." My heart stopped. What did he just say? The other stuff I could let go to his wild imagination. But if he saw someone standing in front of our house, that's when it started to become alarming for me. "Wait, you saw someone stand in front of our house last night, and you see people moving in the fields? Why haven't you told me any of this until now?" Elijah looked nervous, like he was in trouble for not mentioning it sooner, but this was concerning. I tried to level with him on it. "Hey, you're not in trouble, but things like this I gotta know about, buddy. We can't have people running around our property. It's not safe." I tried reassuring him if someone was stalking around the farm at night. I wanted to know about it. I'm glad he told me now so I can keep more of an eye out. "It's not people though, Dad, it's Tobias. Again, he tries to tell me it's the scarecrow, which in reality was probably better he thought that than it being a person. I didn't want to argue with him and upset him, so I dropped it for now. "Okay, let's call it a day and get some dinner ready." I put my arm around him, looking around our fields as we started to head back to the house, looking at Tobias hanging there before heading out of the fields. That night after dinner, I put Elijah to bed and was on my computer working for a bit. I still worked from home remotely even though we're doing the farm now, just to make sure we had some cash flow still. And I'd stay up at night finishing the work pretty late, usually to about midnight. That night I kept thinking about what Elijah said about people in our fields. It concerned me, so I figured I'd report it to the local authorities in the morning just to have it documented. It was probably just some local kids playing in our fields, if anything. Then I heard something outside. It sounded like slow trotting footsteps right outside on the other side of the wall where I was sitting. I froze. There really was someone outside. What should I do? I remember thinking. I didn't even own a gun yet. Honestly didn't think I'd need one. I slowly started to get up out of my chair and quickly made it over to the lamp to turn out the lights. I wanted to make the room as dark as possible so I could maybe sneak a peek out the window to see what it was before it could see me. I heard the slow walking thud of whatever it was still, but it wasn't in the vision of the window corner I was peeking out of yet. I could feel my heart pounding, nervously waiting to see whatever was just freely walking our property, hoping it was just some animal. Then I heard something. Very quietly, I heard words. "You're not real. Follow my voice. I can help you. It's just story lost in the dark all alone. Let me in, it's here, let me in." It was like broken sentences with long pauses in between them. It said these things with a rustic, whistling-like voice. No doubt about it now. Someone was outside, just freely walking our property. Hearing the voices only made me angrier, honestly. I refuse to let someone just freely walk our property. I finally gathered the courage up, grabbed a baseball bat I had downstairs, and started to make it to the front door. I swung it open and ran to the side of the house facing the fields, where I swore I heard the footsteps. I saw nothing. All I could hear now was the wind blowing and the crops swaying back and forth. I was so confused. I know I heard something. The night sky was clear, so I could see around me, but not well enough to look for people's footprints. I didn't know what to do. Then suddenly, loud crashing started, like something was knocking over plates, photo frames off the walls, and even the chairs. It's inside my house. Whatever it is, it was in my damn house. It must have snuck through the front when I came outside. My heart dropped. How could I be so careless? Oh my God, Elijah. I panicked. I quickly bolted back to the front of the house. Going through the front door, it looked like someone had let a rampaging bull into our home. Everything was knocked over and smashed on the ground. Glass was shattered all over the kitchen floor. I was trying to move around to avoid stepping on any glass. I started hearing the rustic whistling voice again. Only this time, it was yelling violently, screeching more words throughout my house. Down the lane, through the field, I hear crows. Don't open your eyes. I made it past the kitchen, scrabbling to make it to the stairway as fast as I could. Whatever this thing was, it was upstairs, rampaging around. I had to get to Elijah as fast as possible. It continued to scream things upstairs as it was moving around like it was looking for something. "Olivia, hi, it's coming. Olivia, you're not real monster. Help open the... Keep running. It won't die." Everything it was saying didn't make sense. like fragments of sentences, but every word held weight to them. Its voice was terrifying, whatever it was. I knew it couldn't be human after hearing it scream. I made it to the top of the steps, hearing a blood-curtailing scream from Elijah in his room. "Daddy, help. It's gonna get me," he said in a tone that had sheer terror behind every word. I push off into the hallway. The sides of the walls have holes and claw marks all up the sides, like something was pulling its way through the walkway. The door to his room was ripped off and hanging against the wall in the hallway. A loud crash, like broken glass, came from his room. I finally turned into his room to see no one there. I looked around in a frenzied panic. His room was destroyed, like it ran around fighting to grab him. I screamed out for him. "Elijah, where are you?" I heard him scream again. I noticed Elijah's window was broken open, like something busted through it and had jumped out. I rushed over and looked out. Broken glass on the ground below. And then I saw him. Something dragging my son from behind into the fields as he continued to scream out for me, disappearing into the field, only able to see the corn parting from above as they moved deeper into the thick of it. I turned around, making it back downstairs and outside, bolting into the direction of the fields where he was getting dragged off to. Every chance I could, I screamed out for him more. Elijah's screams echoed through the night as it dragged him through the cornfields. My baby boy, begging for his daddy's help as it pulled him deeper into the fields with its rustic screeching howl through the night. I was helpless to protect him, unable to do anything for him. I couldn't match its speed. It moved so fluently through the field as the crows above blanked the skies like they were its servants, watching me helplessly trail behind them, squawking and screaming at me as I pushed past the tall cornstalks, trying to keep close. Elijah's faint screaming led me toward where it was taking him. I felt so helpless. Tears started to river down my face. I lost his mother, and now I'm gonna lose my boy. I swore I would look after him, honey. His screams eventually stopped, but I continued mine, hoping to hear back from him and to let him know Daddy was coming. I pushed past out of the field into one of our bath clearings in between the crops. There he was. Elijah was lying there. He was cut up, but he looked okay. Relief started to overtake me. I started to run towards him. Once in my embrace, nothing would take him from me. He was lying on his side, slowly getting up like whatever had dropped him had gone deeper into the crops. He looked up at me, crying and terrified. He screamed, "Ed, help me. Get me out of here, please." He started to stand. "Nah, I'm so scared," while tears were streaming down his face. "I'm coming, buddy. It's gonna be okay. You're safe now." As I got closer to him, I felt better as I was about to scoop him up in my arms and get him out of there, away from whatever hell this is. Right when I got close enough, what looked like 8 silhouettes of hands reached out from the crops, grabbing onto him violently before I could, plunging him into the fields, dragging him across the ground back into the thickness of the cornstalk again. He instantly screamed out to me with his surprised shock. Only this time, our eyes were locked together as he got dragged into the crop. "Elijah, no." "Grab my hand," I screamed out, as all the hopeful feelings I felt being so close to him got ripped again right in front of my eyes. I followed behind him, reaching out to try and grab his hand, but it wasn't enough. Every attempt failing, just barely missing his touch. Then the thick of the cornstalk was no more. The area was all laid down like it was a small crop circle. The sky above was nearly blacked out from the swarm of swirling crows overhead, but I could finally see the thing that was taking my son in the bit of moonlight that peeked through. It was Tobias. The scarecrow was alive. Elijah was right. I felt ineffable fear as I watched this thing. It leaned back as its chest was ripped open, with what I only could describe as shadows coming from its chest, formulating what looked like over 20 silhouettes of hands grabbing and wrapping around Elijah. Some flailed around frantically, moving so inhuman, grasping at the air, some grabbing at the ground, while the other half wrapped around Elijah. One of the hands now reached out, covering his mouth as it muffled his screams. I didn't know what to do as it screamed out another rustic saying, "Tobias can't move. He is made of straw." With tears streaming down his face, Elijah held his hand out toward me. The hand slowly wrapped and warped around him, pulling him into the eternal void of its chest. He slowly disappeared inside the void in its chest until only his arm was hanging out, eventually being fully pulled in. After consuming him, all the hands went back inside it. Its chest started sewing itself back up as it leaned forward, now hunched over. I was in a coma of fear as I watched it. I couldn't move a single muscle in my body. The only noise now was the crows overhead, squawking and flying in circles around us. The scarecrow twitched every couple of seconds. It slowly began to move again, looking up toward me, staring into my soul with its sewn-together face. It said one final thing that night. "It's just a scarecrow. Don't be afraid." There was calm still after that. Then it let out another rustic scream that pierced through the night sky, sending all the crows flying in different directions. I couldn't fight this thing. This had to be some embodiment of a living nightmare. Adrenaline pumping through me, I bolt backward, out of the clearing onto the trail heading back to the house. It pushed out of the crops falling over as it chased in the direction I was running, quickly recovering and crawling after me on all fours like some animal. I looked back at it. The silhouettes of all the hands had returned, flailing around its body. They moved like snakes in different directions frantically around its body. It used them to grab the ground and move faster toward me, screaming its rustic howl as it chased after me. I turned the corner where the barn was, and the final pathway stretched to the front of the house and the truck. It was toying with me, screaming from behind me, still howling its rustic screech into the night sky as it crawled behind me. It's like it wanted me to feel hopeful, like I could escape before it took me. Like before, when it took, I just kept running. I made it back to the front of the house and headed to my truck. I kept a spare key inside it and left it unlocked that night. Thank God. I jumped in, locked it, and turned it on. The headlights flashed in front of me, but I didn't see anything. I quickly put it in reverse and wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. My heart was pounding, and tears rolled down my face. I was unable to protect him, feeling I should have done more. But facing this thing felt like suicide. I just want my son back. As soon as I started to back up, it landed on the front of my truck, smashing the windshield on its landing. Its serpent-like silhouetted arms were now wrapped around the front of the truck. Its face was inches away from mine, the cracked windshield being the only barrier between us. It's like it was looking deep inside my soul with its demonic sewn-together eyes. It let out another scream, its mouth pulling down as the stitched sewing was holding it. The scream was so powerful it looked like it was about to rip the stitching. I quickly put the truck back in drive and floored it, moving towards the cornfield and slamming on the brakes. The creature flew off the front of the truck from the force and fell to the ground. I watched it scramble on the ground and looked back up at me. It tilted its head and started to lunge toward the truck again. I then floored it again, running over it with my truck as I did. I heard its rustic cries into the night. I quickly put my car in reverse and ran back over it. Again, it cried out a high-pitched screech. I started yelling back at it now, feeling like I was hurting it like it hurt me. I repeated this motion over and over again. I wanted to kill it for ripping everything from me. Finally, I reversed enough to have my headlights as a spotlight on it as it lay there. I didn't want to leave, but I rolled over it so many times. Eventually, I drove to the sheriff's station as fast as I could to report everything that had happened. When we returned to the scene, the scarecrow wasn't there. They didn't believe anything I said about what had happened that night either. I mean, how could I blame them? Everything that unfolded sounded like some bad dream. They saw the state of the house and asked me again if there were some details I may have been missing out on. They even questioned me, and I am still under investigation, thinking I played some part in this. They themselves said a lot was unexplainable, but the case is still open to this day on my son's disappearance. I still hear its rustic voice mimicking my words in my head at night. I know what I saw and what took him, and it's still out there.